Good afternoon, and I would like to officially open our session, which is focused primarily on the oil and gas industry, particularly in relation to the point of whether it is indeed fossilized. But before we delve into the discussions around the topic, whether we're seeing the end of the oil and gas industry as we know it, I think it's important to introduce my very, very knowledgeable panelists who are indeed experts in their own niche areas. First, I will start with Mr. Austin Olorunshola, who is the country chairman of Energy Institute Nigeria. And moving on very quickly, an accomplished professional in her own right, I would like to introduce Mrs. Rolake Akingwe Filani, who is the managing director of Energy Inc. Advisors and also the senior Africa advisor of IFU Danish Investment Fund. We also have online Mrs. Yemisi Awunuga, partner in Templars, who has charge of the energy and infrastructure projects. Mr. Ade Adiola, who is the managing director, Energy and Natural Resources of Standard Chartered Bank, should join us shortly. And of course, my name is Stella Duru. I'm a partner of Banwa Godalo. I sit in the energy practice group, and I will be the moderator for today's session. I would encourage the participants online to please drop any questions that they have for us in the chat room, and we will get to that before we wrap up the session. Now to the business of today. With all of the uncertainty and challenges that COVID-19 has clearly brought on the world, and with the recent happenings in the oil and gas industry, and I'm speaking to the combination of falling oil prices on the one hand and weak global demand on the other, caused partly by the coronavirus pandemic, we're certain that if we took a poll with all the participants online, we could actually come back with reports saying that we're indeed facing a dying industry. And to just put some color to that, the DPR, the Department of Petroleum Resources, predicts that the 2020 oil revenues will most likely be very abysmal, as these revenues will be 80% lower than any expected revenue for the year. Interestingly, even the NNPC last month complained rather bitterly about the fact that over 50 cargoes of oil and 12 cargoes of liquefied natural gas have no buyers in sight. And clearly, Nigeria as a country will be constrained to cut production by nearly a quarter. So our objective today is to have some engaging and deep conversations and throw some insight on whether indeed we're witnessing an end to an industry where most of us continue to play and which we have grown to love. And so moving very quickly, I will go to Austin, and I would say that, with, I guess, the backdrop of this seemingly doomsday scenario that I have painted, what would you say the potential long-term impact of the crisis, of the COVID-19 crisis, would be on oil, gas, and chemical companies?
Okay, thank you, Stella. And let me just say, thank God we're a praying nation. And to say on behalf of the Energy Institute Nigeria here, I'm very much honored and humbled to participate in this debate. But just let's quickly roll back 1 minute recap of COVID-19 itself. Because everything shouldn't be blamed on COVID-19. So first 2 months of the year, of course, indeed, we had a health scare. And then before you knew it, it became an emergency. Before you knew it, it became a pandemic. By March, industries, of course, basically started to shut down gradually. And before we knew it, of course, we had a total lockdown. But, and big but, that was the time that two big players who produce about 20% of the daily production of the world Russia and Saudi Arabia. How about that? I mean, for such a time, that's really the best time for them to test themselves in the market space, and went into a price war. And before you knew it, it became a total market collapse. Thank God in the last few weeks, we started kind of easing down gradually. But I would say, except for very major positive disruption going forward, fossil fuels generally will still be with us for quite a very, very long time. Definitely replacing oil and gas within a very short period. For me, I really don't see that very much in the horizon. So what are the real implications that I see going forward in the longer term? A couple of them. So the first is that indeed we may actually really see the so-called peak demand very, very soon, in which case what it really means is that we will not be seeing the kind of trajectory in terms of demand growth, basically going forward. Now, once that happens, what it does is that it tilts the balance on the supply side, and before you know it, you could start to have a glut in the market or some kind of surplus, which would then hit prices. So I think prices might then have to remain almost on the low side for quite some time, really going forward. Now, if we're not careful, if we don't really get coordinated, it might trigger a struggle for market share, which is, and we've seen a little bit of it in the last 100 days. It might trigger that because there's quite a lot of people rushing their crude to the market at this point in time, which would then damage the market even more. It will affect investment cuts, it will affect projects in terms of delays. One of the things I see certainly going forward from the government side, I think there will be a lot more governments now, because the geopolitical play or geopolitical redefinition of the energy play itself will definitely change. Gone are those days where maybe exporters will just continue to look at supply. I think they have to begin to look at both supply as well as demand. Otherwise, they may not be able to pick their fight properly. One of the other things I see longer term impact is around social inclusiveness. There has to be a very brand new thinking around sustainability going forward. And if all this then happen to our industry, definitely skills and competencies will begin to kind of slack back a little bit. It's important for me to also mention the fact that from the technical side, we see quite a lot of impact on exploration side of things, and that will also basically impact going forward bid rounds, if you like, for green acreages. I think that's a space we really need to watch going forward. But also viability of even near-field development will certainly be challenged, because if oil prices get weak and if there is a glut in the market, definitely there will be some basic issues going forward. So for me, these are the key things I see for the longer term impacting oil and gas. Thank you very much, Stella.
Thank you, Austin, for your very insightful points that you've made. Clearly, you are a very positive gentleman, because you've rightly stated that we're not going to see the end of this oil and gas industry, at least not in the very near future. But then, interestingly, you've identified that there are certain things that necessarily need to be fixed. And whilst we're keeping up with this, positive spin, I guess there are also the players in the renewable space that are looking to, enter into this, have a bit of the market share. And I'm going to now then move to Rolake very quickly, because the truth is, I believe it was in May of this year, there was some commentary from Deloitte, which predicted that many large oil, gas, and chemical companies will be forced to, placate their liquidity issues by diversifying their portfolios into other sources of energy. So Rolake, what do you think about this prediction? Will we be seeing a surge in the renewable energy space? Is renewable energy an alternative to oil, given where we are as a country, the stage of our development?
Yes, thank you very much, Stella. I hope you and everybody else can hear me. First of all, I'd like to thank the NBA SBL for inviting me to be part of this distinguished panel, and to my fellow panelists, Engineer Lauren Shola and Mrs. Awonuga as well. Really great to be here with you and Stella yourself. There's clearly been a lot of discussion around traditional energy companies diversifying and pivoting in their business models. And that has been so we see a lot of the IOCs over the last few years have been rebranding themselves as energy companies as opposed to oil and gas companies. But let's bring it home to Nigeria. And the question is renewable energy an alternative to oil at this present stage of Nigeria's development, and what may be the rationale for that? I wanted to establish something, first of all, because I hear a lot of talk about peak oil and life after oil. We have to look at the bigger picture. Life without oil is not as simple as many people think. And I think even advocates of renewable energy will admit this. Okay, so today around 46% of oil goes to making gasoline for transportation. But guess what? The remaining 54% is used in fields as varying as medicine, benzene, for instance, which is an offshoot of petroleum products, cosmetics, sticks, petrochemicals. Even synthetic rubber is a derivative of polymer, which comes from oil products, cleaning products, asphalt. I could go on and on. So, and when you also look globally, 95% of fuel demand today, globally, is from the transportation sector, which by and large still relies on the oil sector. So I thought it was important to establish that. So if we're answering the question of whether renewable energy is an alternative to oil at this stage of Nigeria's development, we have to look at several things. Its competitiveness vis-a-vis oil, its affordability vis-a-vis oil, its efficiency, sustainability, and what I would like to call, as a finance person, its financeability. The truth is, the crisis has revealed that Nigeria has been a hydrocarbon nation for many decades, but it's still been unable to provide universal access in terms of electricity to its population. So let's even look at how much we're spending energy sources. A lot of the savings we've made from the removal of petroleum subsidies, for instance, can be used to invest in more diversified energy systems. But if we look at the grid, the gas-fired power sector in Nigeria, we have instability, we have volatility. And that unreliability in the grid is what has accounted today for Nigeria's largest off-grid industry. And guess what that industry is? It's the diesel power generation market. And so when we look, what we're really talking about is vis-a-vis gas as a substitute. And what we're seeing over the last few years, over the past decade, Stella, is that the levelized cost of electricity from solar, for instance, as one type of renewable energy source has actually been decreasing, right? And the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, actually estimates that for solar PV and wind, the costs have reduced so much so that about 2/3 of the world's population now live in countries where either solar or wind is the cheapest option for electricity generation. So when we bring it down to Nigeria, 77% of our demand is already through self-generation. So what that says is that somehow we haven't been able to really make the link between our oil and gas sector and our power needs. And I think there is a space for alternative energy to plug the gap. And so when we look at what Nigeria needs today, what Nigeria needs today is large-scale industrialization. It needs large-scale manufacturing. It needs thriving SMEs. And all of those need energy. So I see renewable as a potentially viable alternative energy solution in helping to plug the gaps. But guess what? Because a lot of businesses are still connected to the national grid, some businesses obviously still use diesel generation. The kind of solution, hybrid solution. So I'll give you a practical example. In the advisory work I do for the Danish Investment Fund, one of the first investments we're about to close in Nigeria is in a company that produces, that has a service called Energy as a Service, where they're helping banks and other institutions that have multi-site locations find solutions that will utilize solar, that will utilize diesel, and then when the grid is not erratic and stable, will also plug into the grid. Then there's the issue of availability. Solar obviously comes from the sun, and Nigeria does have high irradiation levels, particularly in northern Nigeria. And there's an estimate that across board, we get about 6.5 hours daily of sunshine. So clearly we have the resources. And in fact, the amount of radiation we get for the sun is about 120 times the total average annual electricity energy generated by the grid. But then the flip side of that is we also have 200 trillion cubic feet of gas resources, which we need to harness. Then the last 2 points I wanted to make were around ease of deployment. I just wanted to check that you can still hear me, Stella, because I'm hearing a noise.
Yes, I can hear you, but you're fading a bit at some point. So yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So the last 2 points I wanted to touch on were this whole issue of sustainability and ease of deployment. One thing we've seen during the COVID-19 crisis is that many renewable energy solutions have actually proved much faster to deploy than traditional conventional energy. And that's because, by and large, a lot of the technology explored in the Nigerian market has been upgraded. And I can't think of one major utility scale renewable energy project today, apart from the hydro source in the solar PV space. It's faster to deploy and has proved more efficient, particularly for electrification of the community and other healthcare facilities. And then finally, this whole of sustainability. Research has shown that for every $1 million that is spent in the renewable energy space, you have 25 new jobs created versus conventional power or fossil coal investments, which create about half the number and type of jobs. And of course, we can talk about the environmental friendliness and all of that. So, assuming you're and you don't believe that renewable energy is a potential energy source of need, and the question is, how do we then sustainably and ethically utilize our fossil fuels to provide universal energy access? And I'm not sure the oil and gas sector has managed to fully answer that question, which is why I would say yes, it can provide a viable alternative to Nigeria in terms of the broader energy mix.
Thank you very much. You have actually touched on so many key points. And in truth, whilst renewable energy may appear to be a simple alternative, it's actually not that simplistic. Clearly, we need the mixes to be able to move Nigeria as a whole, because we've got the scarcity of power. In another breath, we've got the struggles with gas infrastructure. And then, with all that's happening with oil, we necessarily need to bring all of these different sources together to help move the country, to where it ought to be. Because if we do not have power, then the industrialization that you've spoken about can't happen, because industries need power to move. If we do not have the infrastructure moving the gas from the wellheads to where they need to be used, then we will see the deficits that we continue to see in the power space. So indeed, there appears to be some room for renewable energy, but I do not think that at the point where we are, that it can replace in its entirety the value and the benefits of oil. You actually touched on a very key point about the fact that whilst we're looking at 46% that is the traditional use of oil, there are so many other industries that rely on the byproducts from oil to be able to continue to be in business. So clearly, seeing the end, like Austin said, of this industry anytime soon. So moving very quickly now to Yemisi, and I guess this is, you know, trying to deepen the conversation a bit. We've seen indices from the World Bank and other financial institutions predicting a recession in many economies of the world, including Nigeria. So everywhere we turn, there appears to be a doomsday picture being painted. With the drop or the seeming drop in foreign direct investments, do you honestly think that there's any aspect, any segment, any part of the oil and gas industry that would bloom post this crisis, you know, that has been birthed on the world by COVID-19?
Thanks, Stella, for moderating the session, and thanks to my my co-panelists. So for me, I mean, I would start by saying that yes, the sun seems to be setting on oil, right? But it's not one that will be quick to eclipse, right? The context in which we're discussing this is different because unlike the past, where we weren't dealing with a global humanitarian crisis, things were quick to rebound. But now we're dealing with supply shocks and we're dealing with a global humanitarian crisis. Definitely there would be a change and there will be a transition. And the industry that would emerge from this crisis will be one that we've never known. Now, for me, the conversation can never be an end to oil and gas to renewable. It would always be a new narrative of having an energy mix. But still within the oil and gas space, it's been predicted that gas, the implication and the impact on gas is expected to be moderate because it's one of the cleaner fossil fuels. So what we expect globally and even bringing it home to Nigeria is that there'll be demand for gas for industrialization. We also expect there to be demand for LNG. And if you look across the gas chain, from what we can even see in the market and we're beginning to see, gas to petrochem, gas to methanol, gas for value addition is one segment that I believe will thrive post-COVID crisis. If we take this further down to the downstream sector, I believe that because of the slowdown in demand for oil and what's happening across the globe, and also the uncertainties with whether there would be a second or even a third wave of the crisis, refining should open up. The refining space is expected to open up for domestic utilization, principally. And we expect the marginal operators and even mostly marginal operators and independents to begin to redirect their energy and begin to reposition their portfolios to deal with refining. The government is also expected maybe to prop up assets and facilities that are actually not working optimally in the refining space. If we go down to the midstream sector, that sector has always been because of the way the modeling is done, right? If you have bankable counterparties and you have throughput and your fixed capex modeling, we expect it to survive. And that's why you would find that even in the midst of all of this the AKK is expected to, to get traction and be developed. I'm aware that SNG has completed the Agbo distribution network. I know of a number of stranded free zones that are also seeking to bring on distribution network into their zone for supply and distribution of gas. So in terms of the downstream sector and the midstream sector for gas, I see that booming post and even during COVID. At the upstream level, because of the impact and the relationship between crude oil production and associated gas, it's a bit iffy at this point what would happen, because as long as crude oil is impacted, as long as commercial allowances are still now being rigorously monitored and managed, right? Crude oil production will continue to be affected, which means associated gas will be affected. But I would imagine or expect that government and the commercial minds now need to begin to talk about the pricing that would work for non-associated gas production, so that on its own as a commodity, let's think of how that would thrive, but that's in that sector. If we then move on to the downstream, fully downstream sector, I also think from what we're beginning to see, that entities, because the vulnerabilities and implications are going to vary across the board, country to country, companies, and even within the value chain. So for efficiency, to be able to wring out every cent from the dollar, I imagine that the downstream infrastructure would also have to be upgraded, upscaled, or rehabilitated. So you're having conversations with persons who are interested in rehabilitating terminals, in upgrading pipelines and making them really theft-proof, and bringing on new technologies, to be able to ensure that at least, if nothing at all, for the residue and the residual life cycle on most of these assets, you should be able to ensure that there is efficiency and optimization of production. So if you look across that scale, I think gas would be with us for a while. Oil will probably not go away, but because it's a finite resource, at some point, it would peak and it would decline. And the narrative that would emerge in the next few years, when we're having a conversation in the country on oil and gas, it would be the energy mix narrative, as opposed to just oil and gas.
Thank you so much, Yemisi. So from what you've just shared with us, it is clear that whoever is online listening to us needs to be paying attention to gas. So whilst the whole challenges that the oil is seeing with the low prices, the glut in the demand, gas appears to be the beautiful bride right now. And anyone that knows anything about Nigeria and its oil and gas industry, when you try and find out what we are about, you would find that Nigeria is typically described as a province of gas with a drop of oil. And when you situate that, you can now then see how much gas we're sitting on that needs to be, monetized. But then the question would be, with all these interesting sectors that you say will most likely bloom after the crisis is over, the question is, well, we need money to be able to do this. Anyone that plays in this space understands that the oil and gas industry is one that is capital intensive. So the questions most people will be asking would be, should we be seeking new financing options? Or with existing entities right now, should we be speaking to our financiers and looking for ways around existing facilities that we have? Should we be seeking for debt service waivers and consents? So I'm just going to come very quickly to Ade. And thank you, Ade, for joining us. You joined just right in time. Ade, like I said at the beginning of the session, is the Managing Director of the Energy and Natural Resources Company, Chartered Bank London. And Ade is who you'd call your financial guru. So the question, Ade, would be that what should the executives and boards of oil and gas companies be asking? What should their overarching outlook for the next 2-3 years be? In addition, given your focus on providing investment banking solutions for clients across the entire energy value chain using multiple products, it will be beneficial to hear from you what the financial options that are available for companies looking to come into the space, one, and even for those that are in the space right now and have been hit really badly by this crisis.
Thank you very much. And first, I hope you can hear me. I think that's the first thing to do is a sound check.
We can hear you, right?
Yes. Okay. I've been having a couple of technical difficulties getting on, I would recommend that you don't use BT, as we found out the last time. So just to get to the point, I think there are a couple of points, and thanks for anchoring while I was trying to get on, and I've listened as a participant on the side to a lot of the conversations and how Stella has been coordinating the questions and the responses from the distinguished panelists. Fundamentally, when you look at it in terms of Mr. Olorunsola had given a very good backdrop, and I'm very pleased with also the comments from Rolake regarding the fact that it is not about renewables or energy transition. It's not a substitution. It's about having a holistic approach to energy sustainability. And also Yemisi's comments around the fact, and Stella's around the fact that, yes, we tend to speak quite a lot about crude oil, but a huge component that sometimes gets missed is the gas component, which has the biggest macroeconomic impact, and which, by the way, is the most difficult to finance. You did mention the AKK pipeline, which is just being flagged off. Standard Chartered is privileged to be working as financial advisors alongside Hybrid Capital on that particular opportunity, which is taken of $2.7 billion, which is quite transformational. And it just says a couple of things. First, transactions and viable projects can still be done even in a situation where there is significant market risk, provided you have the right structures in place. And to Stella's question around what should the boards and CFOs and investors in oil and gas companies should be doing. I've been in the industry for a little while, and I think this is probably my third or fourth down cycle. So you tend to learn from what has been done before that has worked in order to chart the path for the future, or to respond to things that have come that are now impacting that people find quite scary and surprising. So I think the most important piece is first about the operational integrity, and it comes back to simple things like cash preservation, cost optimization, and then looking at the overall capital structure of whatever it's being done, and to make sure that there's enough resilience. The interesting thing that we've seen in this particular cycle is that quite a number of the emerging market producers and the independents you have in Nigeria, they actually have good hedging practices on their portfolio. So they've got commodity hedges for as much as 50–60% of their production. And what this tells you all the time is that first, it's good to have good structures from good lawyers. It's also good to ensure that you have hedging in place. You have to buy insurance before the house burns down. So those that have benefited from having those kind of risk mitigation strategies, they benefited hugely from that. But then it now comes back to another piece, which is investing for the future, because our industry is very much driven by, it's oil and money. It goes together. Reserves are nothing if you don't have the bank capacity or bankability or the funding to develop it. And it comes back to borrowers having to look very deep at different diversified sources of finance, as again, just only RBLs, which is the traditional reserve based lending, to look at vendor financings from off-takers that are taking, so you have a number of trading houses who are active in the industry, who are willing to give advance against production on the short to medium term. The other piece that is there is about the overall thinking around what are the things that are important. What we've seen is pretty much across board. All the companies have taken control of their supply chain, and they are managing projects that are going to deliver short to medium term production as against longer term projects. So we think that if this overall approach endures across the industry, you'll probably actually have reduced overall production, which then shows up of oil prices, as we've seen. So we've seen that cost consolidation happening and more collaboration to enable the company to slide down the cost curve and to reshape the portfolios of these companies in order to create long-term value. Other than that, you need to just take comfort from the fact that this cycle will bottom out at some stage as soon as demand comes back, and then there is going to be hopefully much more cost discipline as well as resilience in the industry. Nothing shakes out bad behavior like adversity. So I cannot hear you very well, so I hope you can hear me, but I can see Yemisi smiling, so that's a good thing.
We can hear you.
Okay, good.
So I think I missed the last part of what you were saying. Maybe you went up for a minute there. Ade, are you still with us?
Hi, Stella. I could not hear that. Yeah.
Okay. So
yes, I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you, but I could not hear the last. I could hear patches of what you're saying, but not very clearly.
Okay, that's fine. I guess we can just move this along because we're on a clock and we have to keep to time. I've been reminded that we're on the clock, and so circling back real quick to Rolake, who clearly has deep experience in financing and investments. And given what Ade has said, you know, it's one thing to have the best lawyers and also to have your insurance in place. The point is, where are the what are the opportunities? What are the investment opportunities? So rightfully, Yemisi has identified that gas is clearly the beautiful bride at the moment. And there are also other opportunities that exist in the oil and gas space. So I guess I would want Rolake to take us through some of the investment opportunities from her experience that would be available post the COVID-19 crisis.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, so I guess the first thing I wanted to say is that the interesting investment opportunities may come as a result of certain triggers. So for instance, I think the removal of subsidies in the downstream space is a positive. I think hopefully in the longer run, it should incentivize investment in local infrastructure. One of the things that we've seen globally with even pre-COVID was the supply glut and, you know, the sort of global storage capacity because of building inventories. And I think when you look at sort of the midstream and the transportation of oil and gas products and that whole value chain, I think there are interesting investment opportunities there because a lot of companies who, for instance, play in the downstream space will be wanting to secure their supplies and their offtake. The other opportunities I see are certainly in the gas. Obviously, we're running at a huge infrastructure financing gap. And I think the World Bank estimates it for Africa at around 90 billion. A large part of that, $90 billion annually, a large part of that is gas. However, there's an opportunity I think we're still missing. We still lack many long-term sources of local currency financing. Think particularly for infrastructure, gas infrastructure, a lot of agencies like NSI are pioneering investment, but we haven't tapped in yet into a prime opportunity, which is our demography. Because we have low dependency ratios and a rising labor force, the impact of aging has not yet hit our pension systems as it has done in the West or in the global North. So I think we really need to look as to how we can mobilize this local institutional capital as a prime means of future and long-term investment in infrastructure. So I think for me, that is one. And then finally, really, as we are moving away from export dependence, or we should be, we need to start investing in local markets, creating and absorbing our own production through local demand. One of the things that we are looking at in my work with the Danish Investment Fund is projects and opportunities that both address the climate issue, but also invest in long-term infrastructure. So for instance, gas flare monetization, I think that will be an important opportunity. We've also seen a shift in how global DFIs invest in the energy space. A lot of them are refocusing away from fossil fuels into low carbon sources. So if we're going to tap into global sources of capital, we also need to be innovative in the way we structure projects, which could be projects that have a hybrid of energy solutions. That way, we can tap into overseas with lower pricing points, tap into local Naira sources of funding, such as the capital markets. Those, for me, I think are some of the interesting investment opportunities I see on the horizon, both in the downstream space and in the midstream, especially with gas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rolake.
I
think Ade, you.
If I may, if I may, just to say that to reassure Rolake that pretty much over the last 5 years, a lot of the transaction that's been done upstream, what we've been doing is to create about 1/3 of the value of the financing as a Naira currency tranche. So we've done that with, yes, we've done that with Santolina, we've done that with Project Cheetah. We've just closed Project Eagle for about $1 billion last month, and 1/3 of the financing was in Naira. Why? There's more liquidity on the Naira piece. It also allows Nigerian banks to participate actively. But again, as well, if you look at the S curve of most of the projects in Nigeria, fundamentally it's about 60% foreign content, 40% local. And when you look at the liquidity supply, that is something that will endure. So we're going to be seeing more Naira complementing the US dollar tranches. But very happy to engage on that. But this is something we pioneered about 5-6 years ago, and we continue to do it. Not just out of necessity of the liquidity available in this space.
Thank you, Ade. Very valid
point. Thank you so much, Ade, for that additional perspective. Clearly, for persons looking at Nigeria, we are ready for business. This is the investment destination. So, the lawyers are ready, the bankers are ready, so we're ready to do business. But then the question is, can we really, achieve all of this? The private sector, we always have all this very interesting blueprint of how we want to shape the country and shape the sector. But the question would be that, can we actually achieve all of this? The aim of attracting the needed investment into this industry without the full buy-in of the Nigerian government. Instructively, I believe it was just last month, the DPR released a strategic policy to support and enhance the business environment and investment drive in the oil and gas sector. And the policy speaks to a fourfold strategy of cost control and management, portfolio rationalization, and asset optimization, operational. And people will be thinking, are these just buzzwords? Are we just, playing to the gallery like most people would think people in government do? So coming very quickly to Austin, what do you think about this policy DPR issued last month? With over 2 decades of, in this space, wearing different hats, how do you think the Nigerian government can actually make the industry, the oil and gas industry, lucrative post the crisis? Austin.
I'm just trying to unmute myself. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent, thanks. So again, thanks, Stella. I guess for me, the first thing is not to look at COVID-19 as a temporary thing. COVID-19 is going to be with us for a very long time, albeit maybe the crisis period may end in another quarter, but I think it's going to be with us for a very long time. And that said, just as it is happening to human beings, I think countries or businesses or entities with underlying issues will suffer more the consequences of COVID-19, of which incidentally, we have seen how it has impacted us as a country. So from where I sit, I see three big intervention areas for government. The first one, which for me is pretty now, is the fact that people don't also really realize that the sector itself, oil and gas, there's a lot of bleeding in there. I think a lot of people just think it's all rosy and dandy. So I think the sector itself deserves some bit of reliefs and palliatives. Not the rice type or granite oil type of thing, but certainly they do deserve some bit of palliative. And we have seen governments around the world doing that already. And I understand the fact that we don't have money, the country doesn't have any money to give. Therefore, all you really need to get, you want to get everything, either by way of taxes or royalties or whatever. But there are benefits in kind that you can give to the industry as impacts to basically temper the impact of COVID-19. For example, you can just do an automatic extension of licenses, say 2 years or so 3 years. So those are the kind of things I think that the government should do as a now type of a thing. The second major intervention, for God's sake, we should conclude and implement these reforms we have been on for like 20 years. Let's just finish it. There are 4 key areas that it will impact if we do that. The first is that it will remove the uncertainty for investors that has been clouding the air for a very, very long time. Secondly, it will take out all the obsolescence in the system in terms of legislation. So we will establish new and modern and competitive terms. Thirdly, we will use it to institute, if you like, good governance and ease of doing business. And fourthly, the last one, which has happened, so it has really exposed us so badly. Let us, at least for once, have a serious stabilization mechanism. Every day I read in the newspapers, the next thing is, who are we going to borrow money for? Who are we going to borrow for from tomorrow? I think it's enough of that. And all this is just simply because we have not managed these resources pretty well, to such an extent where if we have a rainy day like this, although I hear some people said the rains have been falling for a very long time, so they're basically emptied everywhere. The third and major area of intervention, it's a much more look forward aspect, which is basically to look at the areas of transition of energy itself. And there are quite a few things I just want to say on that. The first is that it will be a mix of midwifing, or basically making sure that we get the best we can from what we have, i.e. oil and gas. So we must, I see government's role so much in terms of ensuring that there's sustained balancing of demand, not just at the Nigerian level, it has to be at the global level. You can see what OPEC Plus has simply been able to achieve in the last 2 months. Within the government itself, there has to be a lot more simplified structure or kind of joined up thinking of energy space, and stop all this aspect of I'm looking at gas differently, I'm looking at oil differently, I'm looking at power differently, and all. It's all one chain at the end of the day, and you have to take out all the inefficiencies in the whole in the whole value chain by joining up and all that. We have to look at things around fiscal incentives and competitiveness and make it progressive. You don't just sit down and make a law like the Petroleum Act since 1969. No, you have to move with time and every day. And two more things, and I've talked on one before. The way we deal with host communities has to change, and we need a lot of government. All the social inclusiveness, it has to change, and government has a big role to play in that. Of course, it goes to talk around how do we then share the money or whatever. But whatever it is, government has a big role to play so that we ensure sustainability. Ultimately, it is the totality of being much more competitive as a country, as well as making sure we have an environment that is sustainably enabling for work, for life, as well as for business. Let me stop it there. Thank you very much, Stella.
Thank you, Austin. I think the very quick point I'm going to make is that I see that this session is being recorded, and I'm hoping that the organizers will take a lot of what has been discussed today to the persons that must hear it. Because it's one thing to say that, you know, the industry isn't dying. It's another thing to do things that, you know, create bottlenecks and create obstacles to ensure that we continue to move around in a circle without much development in that space. And clearly you have raised very deep points, and indeed very enriching ones, that I think the government needs to pay particular attention to. Of course, the legislation that will not be named, the PIB, has been in the on the burners for over 10 years, and we you know, say we're a serious country. But then I guess our time is really far gone. I keep getting prompts from, you know, the coordinator that we need to wrap this up, but we need to have time to take a couple questions from the participants. But before we go there, you know, just to wrap this all up, you know, very engaging and insightful discourse. And the truth is, like Austin has said, COVID-19 is with us for a few more months, hopefully not years. And whilst it's arrived with its own deep dive complications and complexities, coping with the new normal and actually ensuring that you bloom post the end of the pandemic, industry players necessarily need to adapt, and adapt really quickly. They need to think outside the box. They need to find creative ways to innovate and operate so that they continue to remain relevant and have value for not just their shareholders, but for every stakeholder in the space. More importantly, everyone operating in the sector, whether it's the unions, the operators, the contractors, you know, the employees, regulators. There needs to be better collaboration. There needs to be cooperation. And that's the only way we would ensure that this industry, which we love, and we have rightly stated during this session, does not end. And we see it, you know, bringing more and more benefits. One, to assure that, you know, the aspects of the value chain that Yemisi very rightly has told us have room to bloom. And also those investment opportunities which Rolake has touched on can continue to remain relevant and attractive to persons that want to do business in our country. So going very quickly to the questions, I see that a few questions have been indicated here. And I think given the time that we have, we would only be able to take maybe 2 questions. First question, Rolake, someone's asking here, can renewable energy power heavy industries at a cheaper price to gas? So clearly, would renewable, I think the question is, would renewable energy be a cheaper option than gas for powering heavy industries? And I think also for you, you appear to have a couple more questions. The second question for you, Rolake, is Nigeria ready to look inward at domestic utilization of oil and gas resources? And you've got 1 minute to answer those two questions. Real quick.
Thanks, Stella. 1 minute. I will do my very, very best. I think the point I made right at the top of the hour was looking at what Nigeria needs now. Nigeria needs, like I mentioned, large-scale industrialization. And in order to do that, your off-grid, mini-grid renewable energy solutions may not meet that. What we would need is utility-scale renewable energy solutions. And I think there's even only one utility-scale solar PV project today that's even close to approval. Most of them are conventional gas power. So what those industries need is a hybrid of solutions. We invest in commercial and industrial offtake structures for renewable energy, but by itself, it is not going to be enough because of the energy demand and the energy gap. That's number one. So what we need is a mix of solution for industrial, for commercial, and for residential. I think the strongest short-term opportunities for renewable energy are in the residential and commercial and some of the industrial space. But for large-scale projects, what we need is the traditional gas-fired power plants, as well as in some cases, hybrid solutions. And then the other thing is how we define large-scale industrialization. It could be anything that, for instance, helps to drive transportation. And I think there is technology adaptation that will come, for instance, with the conversion of gasoline vehicles to natural gas vehicles, CNG, and small-scale LNG, for instance, for trucking and transportation. So there's that potential. The final question around domestic utilization of gas resources, that is where we should be heading to. Gas is a markets business. It is a proximity business in terms of those investments that are small and manageable. Where we transport it over long distances is where LNG comes in. So one thing I do need to say, because of the supply glut and the slump in demand for a traditional market, the most recent policy driver that I think will help unlock that is the DPR's initiative around the Nigeria Gas Transportation Network Code, which obviously make right of way a lot easier for stranded gas resources along pipeline routes, and also increase the investment incentives for investors. And we're already seeing that there is effective demand, but effective demand has been challenged by limited supply. So with the coming on stream of initiatives like the Dangote refinery and modular refineries, I think we'll see more local consumption dynamics in our markets. And I'm very optimistic that Nigeria can build a thriving and sustainable domestic market for its oil and gas resources. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rolake. I think just going real quick to Yemisi, there's a question here about the increasing use of electric vehicles in the West, and it's becoming popular. So how would that affect the oil and gas industry in Nigeria, given that, you know, we may start seeing people importing these electric cars?
So this goes back to what I said earlier on, that it would not, there would always be the energy mix, and there would always be that space for electric vehicles. Now, the question is, are we ready in Nigeria to be able to even drive electric vehicles? If you go to countries where they're used predominantly, you have other infrastructure, you know, outlay and support to be able to use them. So coming into the country and having people use them, you're probably not talking about the average guy on the street. You're going to be talking about a few within the sector that are able to afford this. It goes to affordability. Will that change the mix, or will that change the narrative for oil and gas? Not immediately. So I don't see it as a problem affecting the narrative in Nigeria. We're not there yet.
Okay, Yemisi, I think we lost you there for a minute, so you may need to wrap this up in 30 seconds.
Right. Hello, is it better now?
Yes, we can hear you now, yes.
Okay, so just, wow, 30 seconds, right. So what I've said is, what I've said is the conversation on electric vehicles and people getting concerned and afraid, right, is not looking at everything holistically. There would always be the energy mix. there are people today, for instance, that still rely on biomass, right? There are people that still use coal. Electric vehicles will come into the country, but will it distort the narrative for oil and gas in the country? Not in the immediate future. We're not there yet, because the infrastructure support and outlay that we need to be able to power electric vehicles is more than just having that vehicle. You need to be able to plug and play, you need to be able to recharge at different stations. So maybe you would talk about the cities, maybe you'll be able to have functioning vehicles in like Abuja, maybe like in Lagos, but it would not change the narrative for the average guy on the street and would not change the budget in the interim.
Thank you, Yemisi. I think what I'm just going to add to that point is, if we can't power our houses, how do we want to power the cars? So I guess we need to deal with the issues of having sustainable, power supply. And, we play in this space, and we know the problem with, generation may appear to have been fixed, but there's that gap between generation and distribution in the power sector. And until we can fix that, I'm not sure that electric cars are going to be things that will be staying readily on our streets. We need to have power in our houses. I think we're at the end of the session, but I see one quick question here, and I think this, I would give it to Ade to just respond. What are some major factors for international investors to consider which differentiates the sale of gas from the sale of other commodities? And you've got 1 minute. Did you hear me, Ade?
Can you repeat the question? What differentiates the sale of gas, or what? I mean, I didn't quite get it.
It says, what major factors will differentiate the sale of gas from the sale of other commodities for international investors?
Well, I missed the question, but I would try and answer what I thought I heard, which is hopefully will be helpful. My understanding of your question is that what would incentivize international investors to re-enter the market, given where we are today? And I think this comes back to a couple of items, which I would just put into three broad categories. The first is cost optimization and reduction in terms of our industry as a whole across the value chain. So from end to end, for us to have a complete rethink of how we manage supply chains, right from wellhead to export, looking at discretionary capex and dividends, looking at reducing the government overall burden on the industry, because the industry is very much a very fiscalized industry, and the government take per barrel of hydrocarbon, if we do the comparison between other markets, is quite significant where we are. But again, the tax clawbacks that we can get in the industry in Nigeria is also equally significant. So our chairman for the Energy Institute for not being able to push through all those reforms. So it's entirely on his own watch, Then the other piece, obviously, is rethinking the overall investment strategy. Let's be realistic. There's a need to look at marginal cost producers. There's a need to look at energy efficiency, and then looking at your co-ventural resilience. And the one piece that is a big challenge is that there is a huge difficulty to exit. You've seen a couple of oil companies go into receivership recently. We don't actually have enough of that unless you have a situation whereby marginal producers and inefficient players in the industry actually fail regularly. Typically happens in a number of emerging markets, including Nigeria, is that we pretend to extend those facilities through the help of very learned colleagues in the industry like Yemen, where ideally companies that should be put to rest continue to carry on a zombie fashion and generally just create massive disruption. Then we have to reevaluate what resilience means in terms of the reliability of the supply chain, contracting and hedging terms, investor base, and the host government relations. When we design a business, we have to design it for resilience from the bottom up and contingency to make sure that when there is adversity, you remember I did mention hedging and a number of strategy, we need to design businesses to last through multiple cycles as against pretending that we're going to have a boom period all the days of our life, which may well happen, but again, it's not like it. But the final piece that we don't see happen enough is mergers and acquisitions. We still see too many companies that ideally should combine, optimize their cost base, rebalance their portfolio, and look at distress takeout. We see them continuing to function. So there are some companies that will be better off sharing their cost base with other more efficient operators. So M&A is a piece that is missing. And the one thing that I'm very happy to work with the Energy Institute. I belong to the UK chapter, but the team at the Energy Institute is something for us to just move beyond the egos in the industry, which is quite large, I have to say, because it's a Texan imagine to say fine. Big is not necessarily best. Combinations and collaborations and partnerships are probably better in terms of adversity. And generally, being a big volume producer
Okay, it appears like we may have lost Ade for a minute there, but very, I would say from where I'm sitting, very enriching discourse. The panelists have been fantastic. So I think I'm going to wrap up now. And basically, Austin, I see your hand up. You've got 30 seconds.
Yes, it's just specifically on gas, just to tag on Ade. The key things that the investor certainly will be looking for, especially for gas, especially for material projects, they are generational projects. If you look at NLNG today, those who conceive the final investment decisions are no longer there. There are other people running it. Therefore, you need certainty of everything, your laws and all that. You need stability of it, okay? It's got to be pretty clear. And sanctity of contracts. All those things, once they're there, I think they're pretty fine. And if I may just end up with some 2-3 key messages. The first is more like a prayer for me, and I hope and I pray that COVID-19 will not be remembered for the number of deaths we have seen. Let's pray that this country will actually really use it as a transformational opportunity. The second thing is, hopefully going forward, let's make sure that we look at all these energy matters with a long-term view. They are not short-term things. We have to look at them with a very long-term view. And the third thing I'd like to also leave on the table, what has happened in the last 100 days, COVID and associated events, is just a dry run. It might happen again in the future. All we need to do, let us all together gather together and manage going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Austin. So clearly, key words, mergers and acquisitions. Keep your egos at home. If you're struggling, find someone that is strong enough that would work with you. Partnerships, collaboration, cooperation, sanctity of contracts. Yemisi, are you hearing all the things that make us happy as lawyers? You know, Banwa and Igodalo available to do all these interesting transactions that clearly remain and will continue to see in the space. But I'd like to, at this point, say a very big thank you To my panelists, you guys have been fantastic. The insights that you have shared with us today are actually second to none. We have the blueprint now. I believe, Austin, we have a lot of things that, the Energy Institute can run with. We have so many things that we will continue to press, using the platform of the SBL to ensure that these things happen and that our industry remains viable, lucrative, and the beautiful bride. Thank you, Austin. Thank you, Rolake. Thank you, Ade. Thank you, Yemisi. And last but not least, I would like to thank the SBL for providing us with this platform to talk about things that, keep us awake at night. And to everyone that has tuned in, thank you for staying the course. Have a good afternoon.